Hello and welcome. I'm Rosie Yeung, the founder and principal of Changing Lenses. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm a coach, speaker, and trainer for justice, equity, decolonization, and inclusion, or JEDI for short. Today, I'd like to share with you a short excerpt from my keynote speech on decolonizing business and work. In Canada, I tailor that to be a response to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's call to action number 92 to corporate Canada. So let's start with some myth busting around colonization. You may or may not realize that colonization is far from a thing of the past. In fact, the United Nations has been working on decolonizing the entire world for the last 4 decades. What you see here is a map of non-self-governing territories, effectively colonies, of which we have 17 countries remaining, or 17 nations, because they're not recognized as self-governing. When the United Nations was first formed, there were over 750 million people that were living in non-self-governing territories. Now, another myth around colonization is that it's mainly about land or money or even political rule. But in fact, it is very much about the people and what it does to people. In his book, Decolonizing Wealth, author Edgar Villanueva describes colonization in this way. He says that in colonization, you, meaning colonizers, stick around, occupy the land, and force the existing indigenous people to become the colonizers. It's like a zombie invasion. Now, this visually provocative description I find actually quite apt and relatable. I was born in a colony. I was born in Hong Kong, which was a British colony up until 1997. And I'm an immigrant with my family to Canada. And in both scenarios, I recognize that I have been trying to assimilate myself and blend in or become more white, more Western, in order to fit in and in order to be accepted. And that includes in the workplace and in business. So when it comes to decolonization, it's helpful to look at what the United Nations has declared as the rights of Indigenous people. And the United Nations Declaration is sometimes summarized with the acronym UNDRIP. Now, I think it's wise to consider that when we read some of these statements or other company statements around belief in anti-oppression and anti-racism, that most people, or probably all people, would not publicly at least disagree with those statements. If we look at clause number 12 as an example, it says that Indigenous people have the right to manifest, practice, develop, and teach their spiritual and religious traditions, customs, and ceremonies. That's hard to disagree with. But how does this present itself in the day-to-day decisions we make around policies and around operations in our organizations? For example, some Indigenous people like to smudge and may wish to do so in the workplace. If you're not familiar, speaking from what I've learned from Indigenous people, smudging is akin to, as one person has said it to me, praying with smoke. There could be burning of sage or other herbs and plants, and it is also a part of a cleansing ritual. It is very special and very sacred. In your offices, in your workplaces, once we get back to actually working in the same space together, are there accommodations? Are there places where people can go to choose to smudge? And in terms of our timing around meetings or other deliverables, do we allow time for that in the day? How about other religions? How about Islam, for example? Some Muslims choose to pray multiple times a day. Is it okay for them to excuse themselves in the middle of a meeting to go during one of their prayer times? Or better yet, do you try to schedule meetings around prayer times and not have this overlap or conflict? Here's another example, clause number 17.2. It says that we need to protect Indigenous children from economic exploitation in any work that might be unsafe or hazardous. Again, on the surface, really hard to disagree with. And I would hope that in North America, particularly, that there are no such practices happening in our companies. But how about in your supply chains? How about your vendors or even your customers? If you had a prominent customer that made up a large part of your revenue, and somehow you found out that they were engaged in practices that endangered or exploited children, what would you do? These are important questions that we need to ask ourselves as we really think about how do we not just decolonize our businesses, but make them more equitable and just and inclusive of all people. One final thought I'll leave with you, and that's around clause number 18, the right to participate in decision-making through representatives chosen by their own people. Now, this might come off, coming from the UN, as something about political statements or something about government. In our workplaces, though, we often make decisions and create policies or processes around people or about people. And those people being affected are not necessarily the people that are involved in the decision-making. So how are you involving Black, Indigenous, and racialized people in the very policies and processes that are actually affecting them? Who's at the table and who has the power to make these decisions and set these policies? I hope this short excerpt helped you to reflect and ask yourself some important questions around the way that you work and the way your organization works. If you'd like to find out more and hear more about my speaking topics and more about this topic in particular, I invite you to email me at rosie@changinglenses.ca, or you can send me a request for a free initial consultation. And all the links are here on this website and down below. I look forward to hearing from you.